Tensions in the South China Sea have intensified into one of Southeast Asia's most consequential disputes, with the Philippines and China locked in a fraught maritime standoff that carries implications for regional stability, international law, and freedom of navigation. What began decades ago as overlapping claims to coral reefs, shoals, and maritime zones has grown into a multi-pronged confrontation involving Coast Guard patrols, research vessels, militia boats, and competing interpretations of national sovereignty. At stake are not only valuable fishing grounds and potential energy reserves, but also the broader principles that uphold maritime order in one of the world's busiest waterways. The South China Sea is critical to global commerce. Hundreds of billions of dollars worth of cargo travel through its waters annually, linking the economies of East Asia with markets in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Beneath these busy shipping lanes lie fish stocks that sustain local communion, ties and seabed resources that could fuel future energy development. For decades, Beijing's claims have been anchored in what it describes as historic rights over almost the entire sea, a posture commonly depicted through the so-called nine-dash line. This broad assertion overlaps sharply with the exclusive economic zones of its neighbors, most notably the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. In 2016, the Philippines secured a legal victory when an international tribunal ruled that China's expansive claims had no basis under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNSOS. Beijing, however, rejected the ruling and has since pursued a more assertive maritime strategy. In the opening months of 2026, the Philippines Coast Guard increased patrols near contested features in the Spratleys Islands after identifying a Chinese research ship operating within Manila's exclusive economic zone without invitation or authorization. Accompanying this vessel were dozens smaller boats linked to China's maritime militia, creating a cluster of vessels that Philippine authorities viewed as a coordinated effort to assert control. The Philippine government issued formal warnings and deployed aircraft to monitor the situation more closely. Officials emphasized that the activity was not routine scientific work, but a coordinated maritime maneuver that challenged Philippine rights under international law. A senior Coast Guard official declared the presence of the research vessel and the large-scale swarming by Chinese maritime militia vessels represent a serious infringement on Philippine sovereign rights and maritime jurisdiction. Beijing defended the presence of its vessels, insisting that its scientific missions and fishing activities were legitimate. Chinese representatives reiterated long-standing language about protecting what they term historic maritime rights, asserting that their operations pose no threat and were consistent with international RMAs as they interpret them. These recent developments were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern of escalating friction. Satellite imagery and local reports indicate that Chinese vessels have been tightening their presence near key access points, including the entrance to Spratleys features claimed by the Philippines. In some cases, physical obstacles have been deployed in narrow channels, complicating transit for other maritime traffic and raising questions about freedom of navigation. In response, Philippine authorities have maintained a robust presence of their own. Coast Guard cutters and Navy ships have been dispatched to monitor the movements of foreign vessels, while aircraft conduct airborne reconnaissance to document activities at sea. One notable point of friction has been Panatag Shoal, known in Chinese sources as Huangyan Dao. In previous years, Philippine patrols reported Chinese Coast Guard vessels intercepting Philippine boats near the shoal and issuing challenges via radio. Manila has repeatedly invoked the 2016 arbitral award and the country's maritime zones law to justify its actions in defending its sovereign rights. The Philippine Navy has also reported encounters with Chinese warships that raise the stakes further. In one instance, a guided missile frigate conducting routine patrols near a contested reef reported being targeted by a shipborne fire control radar, a tracking system linked to weapon guidance. The Philippine Navy characterized this as dangerous and provocative. A senior naval spokesman said the incident underscores the need for all states to act with restraint and professionalism at sea. Such radar logs are widely seen by naval authorities as potential preludes to escalation, even when they appear to be directional or temporary. Whether intentional or accidental, they heighten the risk of miscalculation in waters already fraught with competing claims. Maritime tension has not been limited to patrol boats and naval ships. The Philippine government has accused Chinese fishing operations of environmental sabotage, alleging that some fishing boats deploy toxic substances, specifically cyanide, near reefs where Philippine personnel are stationed. Cyanide is illegal under international law for fishing because it kills fish and damages coral. According to Philippine authorities, engagements with these fishing vessels resulted in the seizure of bottles suspected to contain cyanide. Officials described the use of these toxicants as more than an ecological threat. They framed it as a tactic intended to weaken the supply sources for Filipino service members stationed aboard an aging naval ship permanently grounded on 2nd Thomas Shoal, a submerged reef that is the subject of both parties' claims. A national security official explained the use of cyanide on Ayungin Shoal is a term of sabotage that seeks to kill local fish populations, depriving Navy personnel of a vital food source. Beijing denied these allegations through diplomatic channels, calling such report unfounded and stressing that its fishermen operate lawfully. Chinese representatives urged Manila to focus on cooperation rather than confrontation, though they offered few specifics to address Manila's claims. As tensions rise at sea, Manila has sought to strengthen its relationships with external partners. The Philippines Defense Cooperation with other countries, particularly Japan and the United States, has accelerated. High-level diplomatic engagements have touched on economic collaboration, defense interoperability, and regional security. The Philippine president engaged in strategic talks with Japanese officials early in 2026, emphasizing shared concerns over maritime security. These discussions reinforced commitments to broader defense cooperation, including capacity building and technology sharing. Japan, too, has expressed concern over unilateral actions that could alter the status quo in ways that threaten regional stability. In addition to bilateral engagements, multinational military exercises in Philippine waters have become more visible. Known as Balikatan drills, these exercises involve U.S. forces and several allied nations. They have included live-fire exercises, coordinated naval maneuvers, and integration with Philippine defense units. Manila has described these exercises as essential to strengthening deterrence and readiness in the face of evolving maritime challenges. Participating nations assert that these drills promote interoperability, build trust, and reassure smaller coastal states of collective support in upholding peaceful maritime order. Critics of the exercises argue that they risk feeding the very tensions they are intended to manage, with China characterizing them as provocations. For its part, Beijing has consistently framed its activities as defensive. Chinese officials and state representatives maintain that their claims are grounded in history and law, even as the International Tribunal found otherwise. From Beijing's perspective, the Philippines' challenges to their operations constitute unwarranted interference. Chinese messaging repeatedly stresses the importance of national sovereignty and territorial integrity, themes that resonate domestically and reinforce the ruling government's stance. Chinese spokespeople emphasize the need to protect maritime rights and interests against perceived encroachments by external powers or alliances. In Chinese narratives, the presence of foreign navies and joint patrols in the South China Sea are portrayed as destabilizing influences that could provoke confrontation. Beijing advocates for bilateral negotiation mechanisms with individual claimant states rather than multilateral frameworks or legal adjudication through international bodies. Across Southeast Asia, nations have watched the Philippines-China dynamic with concern. Countries with their own claims in the South China Sea, such as Vietnam and Malaysia, have taken note of shifts in Beijing's posture. Some have pursued quiet diplomatic engagements with China, seeking to hedge against economic pressure while protecting their maritime rights. Other regional actors, including Australia and South Korea, have publicly emphasized the importance of freedom of navigation and overflight, principles that underpin global trade and regional stability. These statements reflect broader anxiety that any disruption to the rules-based order could have far-reaching effects. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has long acted as a platform for dialogue on maritime issues. However, ASEAN's consensus-based approach has at times limited its ability to issue strong, unified statements in the face of external pressure. International law experts, meanwhile, point out that UNCL provides clear guidelines on maritime zones, but enforcement mechanisms are limited when a powerful claimant refuses to abide by arbitral decisions. This gap underscores the challenge facing smaller states that rely on legal rulings to uphold their rights. Beyond geopolitical maneuvering, there are human dimensions to the dispute. Fishermen from coastal communities on both sides depend on access to rich fishing grounds for their livelihoods. Escalations at sea risk disrupting lives, increasing the economic strain on families and heightening cultural tensions. Military personnel and Coast Guard crews find themselves operating in close proximity to potential adversaries, often under difficult weather and sea conditions. Even routine patrols carry psychological weight when adversarial vessels are nearby. In the Philippines, public opinion has tended towards stronger defense of maritime rights, but there is also pervasive concern about the economic ramifications of broader conflict. Many Filipinos recognize the value of cooperative trade relations with China, while simultaneously asserting the need for sovereign control over national maritime zones. As the peace resources in the South China Sea continue, the way forward remains uncertain. Both Manila and Beijing have expressed interest in maintaining peace, but their interpretations of what that peace entails differ sharply. For Manila, peace means upholding international law, defending its sovereign rights within its exclusive economic zone, and ensuring safe passage for its vessels and citizens. For Beijing, peace is framed as stability under arrangements that preserve its territorial claims and strategic reach. Deterrence and diplomacy now move hand in hand. Strengthened alliances, enhanced patrol capabilities, and legal assertiveness are balanced against ongoing diplomatic engagement, confidence-building measures, and negotiation channels intended to avoid open conflict. The South China Sea dispute is not merely a test of competing claims, but a broader examination of how international norms hold up under pressure from new geopolitical realities. For the Philippines, China, and the wider region, the challenges ahead will require careful navigation, both literal and diplomatic, to preserve peace, protect rights, and foster cooperation in a sea that has become essential to so many lives around the world.